One of the most interesting states throughout European history has always been the Holy Roman Empire, made up of who knows how many smaller principalities, kingdoms and bishoprics. The question is, how did the Holy Roman Empire work? How did such a massive collection of states with differing interests manage to stay united for nearly 1,000 years? Given that the Holy Roman Empire existed for so long, its administration obviously changed a great deal. Thus, we'll pick the late 18th century to look at because some of the old ways of doing things were still around and the politics was generally much more interesting too. So as of the late 18th century, the Holy Roman Empire was divided like this. The Archduchy of Austria was the most important of these lands and was home to the Habsburg imperial family. Roughly a third of the empire's lands was controlled by the Habsburgs, with another 20% being part of Prussia and the rest being ruled by the others. As of 1765, the head of the Habsburgs was Joseph II, who held several imperial titles. The most important of these was obviously that of Holy Roman Emperor, which was an elected position. Elections weren't open to the public or anything, that would be silly, and during elections there were only 9 eligible voters. These voters were the sovereign rulers of these lands and included people like Maria Theresa, Joseph's mother, King George III of the United Kingdom, who was also the King of Hanover, and Frederick II of Prussia, better known as Frederick the Great. So how exactly did this emperor run his empire? Well, in a word, barely. Whilst the numerous rulers whose realms made up the empire did promise to remain loyal to the emperor, in reality those promises were worth sweet nothing. Many states within the empire, known formally as estates, fought wars against each other, sided with foreign powers against the emperor, and generally just did as they pleased. There was no fixed capital, and the administration of the empire was mostly done from wherever the emperor was at the time, which at this point was mostly Vienna. The empire was formally subdivided into what are called Imperial Circles for the purposes of administration and for the collection of taxes. So the emperor was the embodiment of the executive arm of government, but his authority over the rest of the empire could be pretty weak at times. Obviously, this all meant that the HRE had an extremely weak central authority that largely relied on the big scary Austrian army and a fear of outside invasion to keep it all together. That said, there were arms of government which could and did act with authority across the empire. The first was the legislative arm, personified in the Imperial Diet, which was based in Regensburg. This was the primary means of representation for the individual estates and their rulers. The Diet was made up of 3 sections called colleges. College number 1 was the Electoral College, made up of the electors of the empire, whose task it was, as previously said, to be bribed by the Habsburgs into electing them as emperor. College number 2 was the College of Princes, basically the rest of the nobility, whose job it was to stop the electors and emperor from stomping on them. College number 3 was the College of Cities, made up of representatives of the free cities of the empire, and this was by far the least important section of the Diet. So the way it legislated was that the emperor's representative, most often the Archbishop of Mainz, would bring a proposition to the Diet to be voted into law. The electors, who had 1 vote each, would decide whether or not they would support this law, and if a majority supported it, it would be brought to the princes. The princes also got 1 vote each, with some exceptions in which certain lands were grouped together in what are called benches. Benches had 1 collective vote, and because of dynastic politics, some princes got several. Also, some of these princes, like the electors, were heads of foreign states, and so foreign interests led to a lot of gridlock. Anyway, if a majority of the princes agreed to a proposal, then it would become law, and if not, then things would be negotiated until either it did or until everybody went home. The College of Free Cities also got a vote, but it was only advisory, and thus everybody ignored it. Alongside the Diet, there were 2 high courts, the Imperial Chamber Council based in Wetzlar and the Aulic Council based in Vienna. Both courts had jurisdiction across the entire empire, but only the Aulic Council could deal with criminal cases and importantly feudal ones, i.e. it dealt with cases of people disobeying their superiors in rank, something of particular interest to the Holy Roman Emperor. All of this led to an often divided empire whose estates seldom agreed on anything and would undermine their rivals and the emperor whenever it suited them. Add the religious divide, the rise of Prussia as a counterbalance to the Habsburgs, and the ability for foreign rulers to interfere in its internal processes, and its long-term weakness isn't all too surprising. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with extra thanks to my patrons that you see on screen now. And a special thanks to James Bizanet, Azarka Flash, Mark H, Party Boyko, David Archaeologist, Rob Waterhouse, Chris Wicker, Michael Reynolds, Gustav Swan, Onion Duck, David Silverman, Paul, Maggie Paxkowski, Winston Kaywood, Vasily Aravidis, Christian Cheke, Anthony Beckett, Sky Chappelle, Adam Harvey and Ike.